paper dropped in Science 3 days ago, and it's one of those findings that sounds small until you think about it for more than 5 seconds. Researchers put an empty cup in front of a bonobo, pretended to pour juice into it, and then asked him where the juice was. He pointed to the cup, the correct cup, the one with the imaginary juice in it, and he did it again. And again, 68% of the time, across 50 trials, significantly above chance, with no reward, no feedback, and no real juice anywhere in sight. His name was Kanzi, and if you've never heard of him, he was arguably the most cognitively remarkable non-human animal ever studied. He understood around 3,000 English words. He communicated using over 300 symbols on a special keyboard. He learned to make stone tools. He played Pac-Man. His favorite food was onions. And in the final months of his life, at the age of 43, he proved something that scientists have debated for decades, that a non-human animal can imagine things that aren't there. Now let me be precise about what that means, because this isn't just smart ape does trick. This is about a cognitive ability called secondary representation, the ability to hold two versions of reality in your mind at the same time, one where the cup is empty, which it is, and one where the cup has juice in it, which it doesn't. And here's the critical part: knowing which is which, not confusing the real world with the imaginary one. That's imagination. That's what 2-year-old human children do when they have tea parties with invisible tea. And that's exactly what Kanzi did. The researchers behind this are Amalia Bastos from the University of St. Andrews and Christopher Krupenia from Johns Hopkins. And the way this whole study began is kind of amazing. When Bastos first met Kanzi in 2023, he immediately grabbed his symbol board and asked her and a colleague to chase and tickle each other. They weren't really chasing or tickling. They were pretending. And Kanzi watched this little puppet show he'd orchestrated and was, by all accounts, thoroughly entertained. Bastos later said she looked at that moment and thought, wait, he's satisfied with pretend. That observation became this study. They designed 3 experiments, and they modeled them directly on tests from the 1980s that were originally designed for human toddlers. Same methodology, same logic, just applied to a bonobo instead of a 2-year-old. Experiment 1, the imaginary juice test: 2 transparent empty cups on a table, 1 transparent empty pitcher. Everything is see-through. Everyone can see there's nothing in any of these containers. The experimenter says, Kanzi, let's find the juice, and pretends to pour from the pitcher into both cups. Then she pretends to pour the juice from one cup back into the pitcher, hides the pitcher, and asks, where's the juice? Kanzi points, and 68% of the time, he points to the cup that should still have imaginary juice in it. Not the one that was emptied, the other one. Now, a skeptic might say, okay, maybe he's just pointing at the cup the experimenter touched last. Maybe it's some kind of simple association, which is why they ran Experiment 2. Experiment 2, real versus pretend. This time, one cup has actual orange juice in it. The other cup is empty. The experimenter pretends to pour into the empty cup using the same gestures as before. Then she holds the pitcher over the real juice cup, but doesn't make a pouring motion, and asks Kanzi to choose. If Kanzi actually thought there was juice in both cups, if he was confused about what was real and what wasn't, he'd pick them at about equal rates. He didn't. He chose the real juice 78% of the time, 14 out of 18 trials. He knew the difference. He could hold the pretend scenario in his mind while simultaneously knowing it wasn't real. That's not a parlor trick. That's a cognitive architecture that we've spent decades assuming was exclusively human. Experiment 3 was a replication with a different object. This time, imaginary grapes instead of imaginary juice. 2 jars, 1 empty container. The experimenter pretends to take a grape out, pretends to put it in one jar, pretends to empty that jar. Where's the grape? Kanzi got it right 69% of the time, 31 out of 45 trials, 3 experiments, 2 different pretend objects, consistent results well above chance. No rewards during testing, no feedback, no way to learn from cues during the experiment itself. The pattern of results matches exactly what you'd predict if Kanzi was mentally tracking objects that don't exist. Christopher Krupenia put it this way: it really is game-changing that their mental lives go beyond the here and now. Imagination has long been seen as a critical element of what it is to be human. But the idea that it may not be exclusive to our species is really transformative. And he made a comparison that I think is worth sitting with. He said this is like Jane Goodall's discovery in 1960 that chimpanzees make tools. That single observation forced humanity to redefine what it means to be human. Before Goodall, the definition was simple. Humans make tools, animals don't. After Goodall, Louis Leakey famously said, now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans. This finding is in that same category. We thought imagination was ours. Now we have controlled experimental evidence that it isn't. But let's pump the brakes for a second, because this study has real limitations, and the researchers themselves are upfront about them. The biggest one, this is a study of one animal, n equals 1. That's Kanzi and only Kanzi. You can't generalize from a single individual to an entire species, let alone to great apes broadly. Kanzi was extraordinary, even among bonobos. He was raised in an intensely human environment from birth. He had decades of language training, cognitive enrichment, and social interaction with humans that no wild bonobo would ever experience. He was what scientists call enculturated, raised in human culture. So the question becomes, did Kanzi develop imagination because he's a bonobo? Or did he develop it because he was raised like a human child? Is this ability something that's latent in the bonobo brain, just waiting for the right conditions to reveal it? Or did human contact somehow create something that wouldn't exist otherwise? We don't know. And we might never know from Kanzi specifically, because Kanzi died in March 2025, 2 months before this paper was published. This study is his final contribution to science. Daniel Povinelli, a biology professor at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, raised another valid criticism. He argues that maybe Kanzi isn't really imagining juice at all. Maybe he's just recognizing that one cup was involved in more actions than the other and pointing to that one. Following the flow of a complex interaction without actually representing invisible objects. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one. Povinelli says the study shows Kanzi can follow complex human-guided interaction structures, but it doesn't necessarily resolve the deeper question of what kinds of concepts underlie his performance. And Paul Harris, a psychologist at Harvard, pointed out another gap. What Kanzi demonstrated was comprehension of pretense. He tracked a pretend scenario created by a human. What he didn't demonstrate was production of pretense. He didn't spontaneously create his own imaginary scenarios the way a human toddler does when they pick up a banana and pretend it's a phone. There's a difference between understanding a game and inventing one, and that difference might matter a lot. These are legitimate criticisms. The researchers acknowledge them. Bastos has said her next step is to test apes without Kanzi's background and training. Can a non-enculturated bonobo pass the imaginary juice test? If yes, that massively strengthens the case. If no, then maybe this ability really does require something like the human-ape cultural bridge that Kanzi had. But here's the counter-argument, and I think it's a strong one. Even if enculturation was necessary to reveal this ability, the underlying capacity had to already exist in Kanzi's brain. You can teach a bonobo to track imaginary objects, apparently. You cannot teach a goldfish to do that. The cognitive architecture has to be there for the training to have anything to build on. So even in the most conservative interpretation, this tells us something profound about what bonobo brains are capable of. And there are anecdotal observations from the wild that hint at this. Female chimpanzees in Uganda's Kibale National Park carry sticks around and treat them like infants. They take them into their nests at night. They do the airplane game, lying on their backs and balancing the stick on their upturned palms. And they stop doing it when they have actual babies. Is that pretend play? It looks like it. But anecdotes aren't experiments. What Kanzi's study adds is the controlled evidence that says, yes, apes can mentally represent things that aren't there. Now let's talk about why this matters beyond just being a cool animal story. Imagination in humans is the foundation for almost everything that makes us us. You can't plan for the future without imagining scenarios that haven't happened yet. You can't feel empathy without imagining yourself in someone else's position. You can't innovate without imagining things that don't exist. You can't tell stories. You can't do science. As the cognitive scientist Cathal O'Madigan put it, you can't invent a bicycle if you can't imagine one first. If bonobos have even a basic version of this capacity, it completely reframes how we think about their tool use, their social behavior, their ability to plan and strategize. It means their inner lives might be vastly richer than we've assumed, not just responding to stimuli in the moment, but mentally simulating possibilities, thinking about things that aren't in front of them. Croupier said something that stuck with me. He said if some roots of imagination are shared with apes, that should make people question their assumption that other animals are just living robotic lifestyles constrained to the present. We look at animals and see behavior, but behind that behavior, there might be something we'd recognize as a mental life. Not as complex as ours, maybe, but not the blank slate we've been assuming either. And this connects to a pattern that's been playing out for decades. Every time we draw a line between humans and other animals, that line gets erased. Tool use, culture, language comprehension, self-recognition, empathy, and now apparently imagination. The list of things that are exclusively human keeps getting shorter, which raises an uncomfortable question. What's actually left? Maybe complex language production, maybe cumulative culture and technology, maybe science itself. But the trend line is clear, and every time we find another shared ability, it tells us that these capacities didn't spring into existence with humans. They evolved. They have roots, deep roots. If bonobos have imagination, that means the capacity likely existed in our last common ancestor, 6 to 9 million years ago. Imagination is at least that old. There's a conservation angle here too that I don't think we should skip. Bonobos are endangered. They live exclusively in the Democratic Republic of Congo, south of the Congo River, in dense rainforest that's being lost to logging, agriculture, and the bushmeat trade. We don't even know exactly how many are left. Estimates range from 10,000 to 50,000, and their habitat sits in one of the most politically unstable regions on the planet, which makes conservation incredibly difficult. If these animals have rich inner lives, if they can imagine, if their minds are closer to ours than we've been comfortable admitting, then everyone that disappears takes something irreplaceable with it. Not just a genome, a mind, a perspective, a way of being conscious that we're only beginning to understand. Kanzi died at 44 years old, which is very old for a bonobo. His name means treasure in Swahili, and his treasure to us was this: a lifetime of evidence that the gap between human minds and animal minds is narrower than we thought. That imagination, the thing we've used to build civilizations and tell stories and picture futures that don't exist yet, has roots that stretch back millions of years before any human ever lived. The researchers were, in their own words, starstruck when they met him, and his last experiment, conducted when he was already an old bonobo with possibly failing eyesight, answered a question that philosophers have argued about for centuries. Can animals imagine? At least one could. The question now is how many others can, and what does that mean for how we treat them? If that doesn't make you rethink at least one assumption you had about what goes on behind an animal's eyes, I don't know what will. We keep finding out that the most human things about us aren't as human as we thought, and that might be the most important discovery of all.